At a tea gathering, my parents mocked me. "How does it feel being the most worthless one here?" Everyone burst out laughing. I smiled and said, "How does it feel knowing this worthless one won't be covering your bills anymore?" The room went silent the moment I said it. What happens when the people who are supposed to love you the most call you useless to your face, and everyone laughs? That moment, in a fancy restaurant, wasn't just a betrayal, it was my breaking point. And the words I said next, they weren't just a response, they were an earthquake. If you've ever felt trapped by family expectations, this is my story about finally choosing myself, and how that one explosive night changed everything. You see, for years, my life had been this bizarre, high-wire act. I'm Natalie, 28, a successful software engineer, building a career I was genuinely proud of. But behind the tech world hustle, I was silently bankrolling my parents' lives, all while they systematically chipped away at my self-worth with constant, stinging criticism. Growing up in the Thompson household felt like navigating a minefield every single day. My parents, Robert and Diane, had this uncanny ability to make me feel utterly inadequate, no matter what I accomplished. I'd bring home straight A's, practically bursting with pride, and my father would just glance at my report card and ask why I wasn't involved in more normal kid extracurriculars. When I won the regional science fair in 8th grade, a huge deal for a nerdy kid like me, my mother simply sighed, saying it was a shame I hadn't put that much effort into my appearance. This pattern of belittlement, this constant undermining, it followed me through childhood, through my teen years, like a dark cloud. My achievements, always diminished. My perceived faults, magnified, put on display for anyone who would listen. Family gatherings became their favorite stage for the disappointment show, starring their daughter, Natalie. Despite that crushing lack of emotional support, I excelled academically. I was driven by this desperate, unyielding need to prove my worth, even though it felt like I could never reach the impossibly high bar they'd set. When I earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university for computer science, a dream come true for me, my father's only comment was that I was lucky, and anyone could get into college these days. My mother, ever the traditionalist, wondered aloud why I hadn't chosen a more suitable career for a woman. College became my escape, my sanctuary. Away from their relentless criticism, I didn't just survive, I thrived. I graduated at the top of my class, multiple job offers from cutting-edge tech companies practically in my lap. I accepted a position at TechSphere, a rapidly growing software company in the city, and quickly established myself as a valuable team member. Within 3 short years, I'd been promoted twice, leading my own development team by the age of 25. My financial success came quickly, but with it, an unexpected, crushing burden. Just 6 months into my career, my father lost his job. My mother, who had never worked outside the home, called me in tears, convinced they were about to lose everything. Their house, their entire life, she said. Without even a second thought, I offered to help. Temporarily, I told myself, just with their mortgage payments. What started as a short-term solution, this act of love, somehow morphed into a permanent, suffocating arrangement. Soon, I wasn't just covering their mortgage. It was their car payments, the utility bills, even their weekly grocery expenses. Every single month, nearly 40% of my hard-earned income vanished directly into supporting them. And the gratitude? It was non-existent. Instead, they acted as if it was my sacred obligation. "After all we did raising you," my mother would intone, "it's the least you could do." The inconvenient truths that I'd practically raised myself, cooked my own meals since I was 12, and put myself through college on scholarships, those were conveniently forgotten details. My financial contributions bought me nothing but more abuse. If anything, it intensified. Our weekly phone calls became torture sessions. My mother would dissect my love life, expressing concern that I'd end up alone with all those computers. My father would grill me about my savings, implying I should be making more money by now. Each conversation left me feeling utterly drained, worthless. My therapist, Dr. Winters, had been gently nudging me for months. "You need to establish boundaries, Natalie," she'd say, her voice calm but firm. "Your relationship with them is fundamentally unbalanced. You are giving everything and receiving emotional harm in return." I knew she was right, deep down. But the thought of confronting them, it terrified me. I'd been conditioned since childhood to crave their approval, and the idea of disappointing them further felt unbearable. As months bled into years, my resentment festered, growing right alongside my career success. I bought my own condominium, a modern one-bedroom in a great neighborhood, while still paying the mortgage on their sprawling 3-bedroom suburban home. I drove a modest used car, while financing my father's new SUV. I meticulously budgeted my own personal expenses, practically living like a pauper, while my mother shopped freely with the generous allowance I provided. The emotional toll became a heavy weight. I developed crippling anxiety, experiencing full-blown panic attacks before family gatherings. I started making desperate excuses to miss Sunday dinners, only to be barraged by guilt-tripping texts and phone calls. "I guess your family isn't important enough for you anymore," my mother would lament. "Now that you have your fancy job, you're too good for us," my father would add, twisting the knife. In the weeks leading up to that fateful dinner, the tension had been ratcheting up. My younger sister, Amanda, announced her engagement, and my parents, without a moment's hesitation, volunteered to host an extravagant party. They knew, and I knew, who would be footing that bill. When I cautiously suggested a more modest celebration, my mother accused me of being jealous of my sister. My father, in his classic style, called me selfish and reminded me that I owed them for all they had sacrificed for me. The breaking point was coming, faster than I realized. Years of suppressed feelings were bubbling just beneath the surface. All it would take was one more push to make everything overflow. The monthly family dinner was a tradition I had reluctantly established and funded for the past 3 years. Every first Friday, I'd reserve a table at some nice restaurant, and my entire family would gather to enjoy an evening of fine dining, all on my dime. These dinners typically cost me several $100s, but I justified the expense as the price of maintaining some semblance of family harmony. On this particular Friday in April, I'd reserved a table at Lame, an upscale French restaurant downtown. The occasion was supposedly a celebration of my recent promotion to Senior Development Manager, though I strongly suspected my family was far more interested in the expensive menu than my actual career achievement. The guest list included my parents, Robert and Diane, my sister Amanda and her fiancé Jackson, my brother Michael and his wife Sarah, and my mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, who never missed an opportunity for a free meal. I arrived early as usual to ensure everything was perfect. The hostess led me to our reserved table, a round booth in the corner under a glittering chandelier. As I sat there alone, waiting for my family, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I checked my watch repeatedly, knowing they would arrive at least 15 minutes late, as they always did. The anticipation of their inevitable criticisms made my hands tremble slightly. I took deep, steadying breaths, trying to calm myself. My parents arrived first, a full 20 minutes late. My mother air-kissed my cheek without actually making contact, while my father merely nodded in my direction, already scanning the room. They immediately ordered the most expensive drinks on the menu without even a hello. My mother launched into a complaint about the parking situation, implying I should have chosen a restaurant with valet service. My father, with exaggerated theatricality, scrutinized the menu prices with raised eyebrows, even though he knew perfectly well I would be covering the entire bill. "You look tired," my mother commented, her standard greeting regardless of how I actually looked. I was wearing a brand new dress purchased specifically for this occasion, and I'd spent extra time on my hair and makeup. "Are they working you too hard at that company? Your skin is breaking out." "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, resisting the urge to touch my face self-consciously. "Just busy with the new position." My father grunted, a cynical sound. "They probably promoted you because they need more women in management. Companies do that nowadays, for their image." Before I could even formulate a response, the rest of the family arrived in a noisy, boisterous cluster. Amanda immediately commanded attention, dramatically flashing her engagement ring. My brother Michael looked uncomfortable, as he often did at these gatherings, while his wife Sarah offered a polite, gentle smile. Aunt Patricia, ever pragmatic, made a beeline for the wine list. Once everyone was seated and drinks were ordered, my mother, naturally, took control of the conversation. She launched into an elaborate, breathless description of the wedding plans she was already making for Amanda. The engagement was barely a month old, but I noticed, with a sinking feeling, that the plans sounded exorbitantly expensive, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, I would be expected to contribute significantly. "We're thinking a minimum of 200 guests," my mother announced, beaming. "And the Riverfront Gardens venue would be perfect, wouldn't it, Natalie?" She looked at me pointedly. The Riverfront Gardens was, without a doubt, one of the most expensive wedding venues in the entire city. I nodded noncommittally, trying to play it cool, but my mother, ever manipulative, immediately took this as agreement. "Wonderful. I'll put down the deposit next week." They required $10,000 to hold the date. $10,000. The amount hung heavy in the air between us. Everyone at the table knew exactly who would be providing that money. "That seems like a lot for a deposit," I said carefully, my voice barely a whisper. "Well, quality costs money," my mother replied dismissively, as if addressing a child. "Not everything can be cheap like your apartment." My cheap, one-bedroom condominium had cost me $350,000 in the fiercely competitive city market, but I let the comment slide, as I always did. The conversation continued in this infuriating vein throughout the appetizers. My father complained about needing a new golf club membership because his current one had gone downhill, looking at me expectantly. Aunt Patricia mentioned her upcoming vacation to Europe, her eyes practically glinting, as if waiting for an offer to fund it. Amanda talked endlessly about wedding details, each one more extravagant, more expensive than the last. By the time our main course arrived, I was feeling increasingly, suffocatingly tense. No one had asked about my promotion. No one had shown even a flicker of interest in my accomplishments. Instead, the entire conversation revolved solely around what everyone needed or wanted, with the unspoken, ironclad understanding that I would magically provide it. "So, Natalie," my father said suddenly, his voice carrying across the table, cutting through the general chatter. "I heard your company is having layoffs. Should you really be spending money on dinners like this?" The table fell silent. My company was not having layoffs. In fact, we were expanding rapidly, booming. My promotion had come with a significant raise and a generous equity package. "There are no layoffs," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "The company is doing very well." "That's not what I read online," my father insisted, pushing. "Tech companies are struggling. You should be saving your money." The sheer, breathtaking irony of the statement, coming from a man whose lavish lifestyle I largely funded, was apparently utterly lost on him. "Robert's right," my mother chimed in, seizing the opportunity. "You need to be more careful with money. You're not getting any younger, and no man wants a woman who cannot manage her finances." I felt my face growing hot, a familiar flush of humiliation. "I manage my finances very well," I said, my voice strained, barely holding back the rising anger. "Really?" my father scoffed, a truly infuriating sound. "Then why are you still in that tiny apartment? Everyone else your age has a real house by now." "Everyone else my age isn't paying for 2 households." I wanted to scream, but I bit my tongue so hard I almost tasted blood. Amanda, always quick to capitalize on a moment of weakness, seized the opportunity to talk about the house she and Jackson were planning to buy after the wedding. "We're looking at the Oak Ridge neighborhood," she chirped. "The houses there start around $600,000. Lovely area." My mother approved, nodding sagely. "Natalie, maybe you could help them with the down payment as a wedding gift? 20% would be what? $120,000. That would be so generous of you." The sheer audacity of that suggestion left me momentarily speechless. I was already expected to pay for their entire wedding, and now I was supposed to provide a down payment for their house too? The tension at the table was building, a palpable, suffocating force, and I could feel something shifting inside me. Years of suppressed feelings, of bitterness and resentment, were threatening to surface like a violent tide. I took a slow sip of water, trying desperately to stay calm. "Actually," I began, my voice surprising myself with its tentative firmness, "I've been thinking about buying a house myself. Maybe in Oak Ridge, too." The silence that followed was deafening. My family exchanged shocked glances, clearly disturbed by the revolutionary idea that I might actually spend my money on myself for once. "Don't be ridiculous," my father finally said, his tone dripping with disdain. You don't need a house. What would you do with all that space? It would be wasted on you. Besides, my mother added, her voice laced with admonishment, you need to focus on helping Amanda right now. Her future is just beginning. And what about my future? I asked, the question surprising even myself, an unexpected burst of defiance. My father laughed, a short, dismissive, utterly chilling sound that cut through me like a knife. He looked around the table, a challenge in his eyes, silently encouraging others to join in his amusement at my expense. Your future? Come on, Natalie. Let's be realistic here. And then came the words that would change everything. Leaning forward with a sneer, his voice carrying just loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, he asked, how does it feel being the most useless one here? Everyone laughed. My mother, my sister, my aunt, even my brother Michael let out an uncomfortable chuckle, quickly stifled. Only Sarah, Michael's wife, remained silent, looking down at her plate, her expression etched with discomfort. In that single, agonizing moment, something inside me didn't just break. It completely shattered. Or perhaps something was finally fixed. The crushing weight of years of emotional abuse, of relentless financial exploitation, it suddenly became unbearable. I knew, with absolute clarity, that I could not carry it anymore. The laughter around the table seemed to stretch into an eternity as I sat there, my face burning with humiliation, but beneath that, a slow, hot anger was rising. In that suspended moment, memories flashed through my mind. The countless times I'd been belittled, the sacrifices I'd made, the money I'd poured into them, the emotional abuse I'd endured, all in a desperate, futile hope of earning a love that never, ever came. I looked at my father's smug expression, my mother's amused smile, my sister's gleeful face, and something crystallized within me. Clarity, resolve. They replaced my usual paralyzing anxiety. Without planning to, without the careful filtering I typically applied to every word I spoke to my family, I responded. My voice, surprisingly steady, cut through the residual chuckles. How does it feel knowing this useless one will not be paying your bills anymore? The laughter stopped abruptly. 5 shocked faces stared back at me, mouths slightly agape, as my words hung in the air of physical force. My father's expression shifted from amusement to confusion, then quickly to raw anger. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice low, intense, dangerous. Exactly what I said, I replied, still surprised by the steadiness in my voice. A newfound strength surged through me. I am done. No more mortgage payments. No more car loans. No more utility bills. No more credit card payments. No more funding your lifestyle while you treat me like garbage. My mother's face paled, the color draining from her cheeks. Natalie, you can't be serious. You're just being sensitive as usual. I have never been more serious in my life, I said, my voice rising slightly, filled with a righteous fury. For years, I have given you everything I could, financially and emotionally. And what have I gotten in return? Criticism, mockery, and utter disrespect. After everything we've done for you, my father began, his face contorted with rage. This is how you repay us, by making a scene in public. What exactly have you done for me? I asked, genuinely curious, a sardonic edge to my voice. Did you pay for my education? No, I earned scholarships. Did you support my career choices? No, you belittled them. Did you even provide emotional support? No, you tore down every single accomplishment. We gave you life, Natalie, my mother wailed melodramatically. We raised you, fed you, clothed you. The bare minimum required by law, I noted, my tone flat. And I have been repaying that basic parental obligation 100-fold for years now. My father's strategy shifted from anger to intimidation, his specialty. You will not cut us off, he said with cold certainty, his eyes narrowing. You wouldn't dare. Watch me, I replied, my hand already moving. I pulled out my phone and locked it. In fact, let me show you how serious I am. I opened my banking app, and with a few swift taps, I canceled the automatic payment schedule to go to their mortgage company the following Monday. There. That is the last mortgage payment you will ever receive from me. My mother gasped, a guttural sound. Natalie, That payment is due next week. How will we pay it? The same way other adults do, I said, looking her directly in the eye. With your own money, from your own jobs. You know your father hasn't been able to find suitable work, my mother protested, her voice pleading. He hasn't been looking, I corrected her. Why would he, when he has me as his personal ATM? My sister Amanda, her eyes wide, likely seeing the flow of easy money drying up right before her expensive wedding, decided to intervene. Natalie, you're being cruel. Mom and Dad have always supported you. And what about my wedding? You promised. I never promised to pay for your wedding, I said calmly, but with unwavering conviction. That was decided for me, not by me. Just like everything else. Then, my brother Michael, who had remained silent until now, surprisingly spoke up. She has a point, you know. Natalie has been supporting everyone for years, and no one ever thanks her. Instead, you all just demand more. I looked at my brother, a flicker of surprise and gratitude in my heart. It was the first time he had ever defended me against our parents. My father, his face contorted, turned his anger toward Michael. Stay out of this. This is between us and your sister. No, Michael said firmly, his own voice now steadied with a quiet strength. This involves all of us, and the way we have been taking advantage of Natalie. My mother, seeing her control of the situation slipping away, resorted to her most effective tactic, tears. Her eyes welled up on command, and she delicately dabbed at them with her napkin. I can't believe my own daughter would do this to us. After all the sacrifices we made. What sacrifices, Mom? I asked, truly wanting to know. Name one significant sacrifice you've made for me in the last 10 years. She couldn't answer, instead turning to my aunt for support. Patricia, can you believe how she's speaking to us? Aunt Patricia, who had been quietly calculating how this dramatic development might affect her own financial interests, chose her words carefully. Perhaps we should all calm down and discuss this privately, not in a restaurant. There is nothing to discuss, I said, rising from my seat, a finality in my voice. I have made my decision. I will not be financially supporting any of you anymore. My father slammed his hand on the table, the glasses jumping, several nearby diners turning to stare. You listen to me, young lady. You have obligations to this family. You cannot just walk away. Actually, I can, I said, gathering my purse, my voice steady strong. I have no legal obligation to support capable adults who choose not to support themselves. My only obligation was a moral one based on the mistaken belief that you actually loved and valued me. That illusion is now gone. If you walk out that door, my father threatened, his voice low and menacing, don't expect to be welcomed back into this family. I looked around the table, meeting the gazes of my family. People who had taken everything and given nothing. Who had mocked and belittled me, even as I cashed my checks. That's not the threat you think it is, I said quietly, a faint, bitter smile playing on my lips. Being excluded from this toxic dynamic sounds more like a reward than a punishment. With those words, I walked away from the table, feeling both terrified and, for the first time in my life, strangely liberated. As I passed the hostess stand, I paused, paid for the meals that had already been served, and offered a sincere apology for the disturbance. Then I stepped out into the cool evening air, took a deep, cleansing breath, and felt, for the first time in years, the crushing weight beginning to lift from my shoulders. Driving home, my emotions cycled rapidly. Elation at finally standing up for myself, a raw, primal fear about the repercussions, and a deep, profound sadness for the loving family I had always yearned for but never truly had. My phone began buzzing incessantly with texts and calls, but I ignored them all. Tonight was for me. Tonight was about beginning to process what had just happened and what it truly meant for my future. The moment I stepped into my condominium, my phone exploded with notifications. 15 missed calls, 28 text messages, and 3 voicemails, all from family members. I silenced my phone and placed it face down on the counter. I needed space to process. My hands were shaking as I poured myself a glass of water. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was slowly subsiding, leaving me feeling utterly drained, but strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I had spoken my truth without filtering it through the warped lens of what my family wanted to hear. The texts had started arriving before I'd even left the restaurant parking lot. I finally gathered the courage to read them. From Mom, "How could you embarrass us like this? Call me immediately." From Dad, "You are making a huge mistake. We need to talk now." From Amanda, "You are ruining everything. What about my wedding?" From Aunt Patricia, "Your behavior was shocking. Your poor mother is in tears." Only 2 messages offered any semblance of support. From Michael, "Are you okay? I think you did the right thing." And from Sarah, "Proud of you for standing up for yourself. Let me know if you need anything." I decided not to respond to any of them that night. Instead, I ran a hot bath, something I rarely had time for, and allowed myself to simply exist, without the constant pressure of family obligations. The next morning, I called Dr. Winters and scheduled an emergency therapy session for that afternoon. When I arrived at her office, the familiar calm environment helped settle my frayed nerves. "You stood up to your family," she said after I recounted the previous night's events. It was a statement, not a question. "I did," I confirmed, my voice trembling slightly. "And I feel both terrible and incredibly relieved." "Both reactions are completely normal," she assured me, her gaze warm and understanding. "You have disrupted a long-established dynamic, and that is bound to feel uncomfortable, even when it's the right thing to do." We spent the session exploring my feelings of guilt and examining the deeply ingrained beliefs that had kept me trapped in that cycle of financial exploitation. Dr. Winters helped me see that my parents had conditioned me to feel responsible for their well-being, effectively reversing the natural parent-child relationship. "What you did took immense courage, Natalie," she told me, her voice firm. "Now comes the harder part, maintaining your boundaries despite the pressure they will inevitably apply." Her words proved prophetic. By Monday morning, my parents had escalated their attempts to regain control with breathtaking speed. My father showed up at my workplace, unannounced, creating a scene in the lobby until security had to escort him out. My mother left tearful voicemails, sobbing about how they would lose their house without my help. Amanda sent a detailed breakdown of wedding expenses, with payment deadlines highlighted, as if our conversation at the restaurant had never even happened. The most shocking escalation came on Wednesday when my parents contacted my emergency contact at work, my colleague and friend, Julia. They claimed there was a dire family emergency, and they needed to reach me immediately. When Julia called me into her office to relay the message, I just broke down and told her everything. "That's financial abuse," she said bluntly, her eyes wide with concern. "And emotional abuse too, Natalie. No wonder you've been so stressed. You've been carrying an entire family on your back." Having someone outside the situation validate my experience was incredibly powerful. Julia shared that her own mother had been financially controlling, though in a different way, and she too had had to establish firm boundaries. "The guilt never completely goes away," she admitted, "but it gets easier to recognize it as a programmed response that you don't have to act on." Armed with the unwavering support from my therapist, and now Julia, I felt stronger. The first thing I did was finally assess the financial damage of years of supporting my family. I met with a financial advisor, Blake Richardson, who helped me create a comprehensive picture of my situation. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 4 years, I had knowingly given my parents more than $200,000. This included their mortgage payments, car loans, credit card bills, and loans that were, naturally, never repaid. Additionally, I had spent approximately $50,000 on family dinners, holidays, and gifts. "If you had invested that money instead, Natalie," Blake calculated, his voice grim, "you would have had enough for a substantial down payment on a house in any neighborhood you desired, plus a very healthy retirement fund." "The good news," Blake said, trying to offer some comfort, "is that you are still young and your income is excellent. Now that you are not supporting multiple households, you can quickly rebuild your savings." We created a new financial plan, meticulously focused on my goals, rather than my family's endless demands. For the first time, I allowed myself to envision a future based on my own dreams, a comfortable home of my own, travel experiences I had always postponed, and eventually, true financial independence. Then came the truly shocking development. 2 weeks after the restaurant confrontation, I received an unexpected piece of mail. It was a bank statement for a credit card I didn't recognize, showing a balance of $22,000. Upon closer inspection, I realized with horror that it was a credit card in my name, but I had never applied for it or used it. I immediately called the credit card company and discovered that the card had been opened 3 years ago using my social security number and personal information. The address on the account, my parents' house. The customer service representative informed me that regular payments had been made until recently, when 2 payments had been missed. The revelation that my parents had committed identity theft left me reeling. I pulled my full credit report and found 2 additional credit cards and a personal loan, all in my name, but clearly used by my parents. The total fraudulent debt exceeded $45,000. With shaking hands, I called my lawyer, David Mercer, who specialized in both family and financial law. He confirmed what I suspected. My parents' actions constituted identity theft and fraud, serious crimes that could result in criminal charges. You have 2 options, Natalie. David explained, his voice calm and professional. You can file a police report, which would likely lead to criminal charges against your parents, or you can handle it civilly by disputing the fraudulent accounts with documentation that you did not authorize them. The decision weighed heavily on me. Despite everything, the thought of my parents facing criminal charges was a difficult one to bear. After careful consideration, I chose to dispute the accounts without filing police charges on the condition that my parents sign a legally binding agreement to repay the legitimate debts they had incurred. Armed with this damning evidence and David's expert legal counsel, I arranged to meet my parents at a neutral location, a conference room at David's office. When they arrived, their expressions shifted from self-righteous anger to visible discomfort upon seeing my lawyer present. "What is this about?" my father demanded, his bluster already losing its edge. "Why did you bring a lawyer?" Without preamble, I placed the credit reports and account statements on the table between us. "This is about identity theft and fraud," I said calmly, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "These accounts were opened in my name without my knowledge or consent." The color drained from my mother's face. My father attempted his usual blustering denial, but the evidence was irrefutable, undeniable. "You have 2 choices," I informed them, following David's guidance. "Either sign this agreement to repay the $45,000 in fraudulent debt, or I file a police report for identity theft." You would send your own parents to jail," my mother gasped, her voice thin with fear. "I am willing to make this right without criminal charges," I responded, my gaze unwavering. After hours of grueling negotiation, during which my parents cycled through denial, anger, and eventually desperate, pathetic bargaining, they finally signed the repayment agreement. The terms were strict. Monthly payments made directly to the creditors, with their house as collateral. If they missed even 1 payment, I would proceed with criminal charges. As they left the office, defeated and sullen, I felt no joy in my victory. Only a profound sadness for what our relationship had become, and a hot, bitter anger at their ultimate betrayal. Yet, beneath those feelings, there was a growing sense of empowerment. I was finally taking control of my life, protecting myself from those who had exploited me for years. That evening, I received an unexpected text from my sister Amanda. "Can we talk privately?" "No, Mom and Dad." Cautiously, I agreed to meet her for coffee the next day. When we met, I was surprised to find a very different Amanda than the entitled bride-to-be from the dinner. She looked tired and subdued. "I had no idea," she began, her voice small, "about the credit cards, the loans, everything they were doing to you." "Would it have mattered?" I asked honestly, unable to completely hide the bitterness. She looked down at her coffee, swirling it slowly. "I don't know. Maybe not before, but it does now." She paused, then continued. "They've been telling everyone that you abandoned the family, that you're selfish and cruel. But Michael told me what really happened. And then I found some of the paperwork for those credit cards while looking for something in Dad's office." For the first time, my sister was seeing our parents clearly, without the protective filter of favoritism that had shielded her all these years. It was a painful awakening for her. "I'm postponing the wedding," she continued, her voice stronger now. "Jackson and I are going to save up ourselves, do something smaller. It's not right to expect you to pay for everything, especially after what they did." Her words were the first genuine acknowledgement from any family member of how unfairly I had been treated. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was a start. My brother Michael called later that week, expressing similar realizations. "I always knew they favored Amanda and treated you differently," he admitted, a note of regret in his voice. "But I had no idea about the financial stuff. Sarah has been telling me for years that something wasn't right about how they expected you to support them, but I didn't want to see it." These conversations with my siblings were bittersweet. On one hand, it was incredibly validating to have them finally recognize the abuse I had endured. On the other hand, it highlighted how long they had been willing to benefit from my exploitation without truly questioning it. As the weeks passed, the full extent of the fallout from my decision became painfully apparent. My parents, desperate to maintain their lifestyle without my financial support, began spreading increasingly malicious lies about me to extended family and their social circle. According to them, I had suffered some kind of mental breakdown, had fallen under the influence of bad people at work, or was selfishly hoarding money while they faced destitution. Most painfully, they told my grandmother, who lived in another state and with whom I had always been close, that I had cut them off without reason and refused to speak to them, despite their loving attempts to reconcile. When my grandmother called me, concerned and confused, I had to gently explain the brutal reality of the situation, including the identity theft. Her shock and subsequent anger toward my parents was yet another painful ripple effect of their actions. "I always thought Robert was too controlling with money," she told me, her voice laced with disappointment. "But I never imagined he would steal from his own daughter." Your grandfather would be appalled. The family divide deepened as relatives began taking sides. My father's brothers rallied around him, leaving unpleasant messages about family loyalty and duty. My mother's younger sister, however, who had always been more independent than my mother, reached out to offer support. "Your mother has always been jealous of anyone who can stand on their own 2 feet, she confided. "She resented me for starting my own business instead of relying on a husband or children. I'm not surprised she resents your success too." This insight into my mother's psychology was illuminating, but it did little to ease the raw pain of her betrayal. I had always believed that beneath her criticism was a layer of love and pride in my accomplishments. Now, I had to face the possibility that her feelings toward me were far more complicated, and perhaps darker, than I had ever allowed myself to see. The financial revelations continued as I worked with my lawyer and financial advisor to untangle the insidious web of exploitation. Beyond the fraudulent accounts in my name, I discovered that my parents had been using my financial information in other, equally disturbing ways. They had listed me as a guarantor on their home equity line of credit without my knowledge. They had used my address for tax purposes to claim certain deductions. They had even attempted to access my retirement accounts by claiming to be me over the phone, though thankfully, the financial institution's security measures had prevented this. Each discovery felt like a fresh betrayal, reopening wounds I was desperately trying to heal. Dr. Winters helped me process these revelations, not as new injuries, but as chilling confirmation that I had made the right decision to protect myself. "They are showing you exactly who they are, Natalie," she said during one particularly difficult session after I learned about the home equity line. "Believe them." My meeting with the financial advisor, Blake, took on new urgency as we worked to secure my financial information and prevent any further fraud. We froze my credit, changed all my accounts and passwords, and set up monitoring services to alert me to any suspicious activity. Unfortunately, this kind of financial abuse within families is more common than people realize, Blake told me, his voice empathetic. The betrayal of trust just makes it particularly devastating. We calculated that in addition to the more than $200,000 I had knowingly given my parents, they had fraudulently obtained or committed me to approximately $70,000 in additional obligations. The total impact on my financial health approached $300,000, not even counting the lost opportunity cost of investments I could have made. Despite the staggering sum, Blake assured me that my situation was far from hopeless. "You have an excellent income, and now that you are not supporting multiple households, you can rebuild quickly. Within 2 years, you could be in a better financial position than most people your age." This new perspective helped me focus on the future rather than dwelling on what had been taken from me. I committed to a strict financial recovery plan, cutting unnecessary expenses and maximizing my retirement contributions. For the first time, I was saving and investing for myself, not to create a safety net for others. 3 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, I received an email from my father. The subject line read, reconciliation, but the content revealed a very different purpose. After a brief and obviously insincere apology, if I felt hurt by anything they might have done, the email got to its real point. They were facing foreclosure on their house and needed my help one last time. The old me, the conditioned, guilt-ridden me, would have immediately responded with an offer of assistance, sacrificing my own financial health to rescue them yet again. The new me, strengthened by therapy and supported by genuine friends, recognized the manipulation for what it was. I forwarded the email to David, my lawyer, who confirmed that under our agreement, my parents were required to sell their house to pay off the fraudulent debts before facing foreclosure. They're trying to circumvent the legal agreement, David explained. If they contact you again about financial matters, direct them to me. I sent a brief, factual response referring them to the signed agreement and David's contact information. Within hours, my mother called, crying hysterically about becoming homeless. When I calmly reiterated that they needed to speak with my lawyer, her tears dried up instantly, replaced by cold fury. "You always were a selfish child," she hissed. "After everything we did for you, this is how you repay us. By seeking lawyers on your own parents. I am enforcing an agreement you signed after committing fraud in my name." I replied, surprised by my own steadiness. "That is not selfish. It is self-preservation. We are your parents," she shouted, as if that relationship entitled them to commit crimes against me without consequences. "Yes, you are," I acknowledged, my voice quiet but firm. "And that makes your betrayal even worse." I ended the call and immediately contacted Dr. Winters, who helped me work through the renewed guilt and doubt my mother's call had triggered. "They are using the parent card as a weapon," she observed. "But being parents gave them responsibilities toward you, not unlimited rights to exploit you." Meanwhile, my brother Michael revealed that our parents had been pressuring him to talk sense into me and convince me to help them keep their house. They had also approached my sister Amanda with the same request, suggesting that if she could persuade me to rescue them financially, they would help with her wedding after all. "They're trying to use us against each other, Natalie," Michael said disgustedly. "They haven't changed at all." The most surprising development came when Jackson, Amanda's fiancé, contacted me directly. We had never been particularly close, but he wanted to meet for coffee to discuss something important. When we met, he seemed nervous but determined. "I need to tell you something about your parents," he began. "Last year, before Amanda and I were even engaged, your father approached me with a proposition. He suggested that if I married Amanda, the family would benefit financially because you would pay for everything." I stared at him, stunned by this revelation. "What?" Jackson nodded uncomfortably. "He implied that marrying into your family was a good move because you were the cash cow who would ensure everyone was taken care of." I was horrified, but Amanda assured me it wasn't like that, that you were just generous with family debt. The calculated, chilling nature of my father's thinking, the way he had viewed me, not as a daughter to be loved, but as a resource to be exploited, and even used as a bargaining chip in others' relationships, left me speechless. "I wanted you to know," Jackson continued, his eyes earnest, "because Amanda and I are trying to build an honest relationship, and keeping this secret felt wrong. Plus, after what they did with those credit cards," he shook his head, "you deserve to know the truth." This conversation with Jackson was the final, undeniable piece of evidence I needed to fully accept that my relationship with my parents had never been what I pretended it was. They had not seen me as a daughter to love and support, but as a useful tool to exploit for their own benefit. That night, I wrote a letter that I never intended to send, pouring out years of hurt, disappointment, and anger onto the page. The act of putting these raw feelings into words was incredibly cathartic, allowing me to acknowledge the depth of my pain without directing it at anyone. When I finished, I felt lighter, as if I had finally put down a burden I had been carrying for decades. 6 months after the confrontation at the restaurant, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Free from the crushing financial burden of supporting my parents and the soul-crushing emotional burden of constantly seeking their approval, I discovered spaces within myself for new growth and genuine connection. My therapy sessions with Dr. Winters shifted from crisis management to deeper healing work. We explored the childhood patterns that had shaped my people-pleasing tendencies and worked on developing a stronger sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to external validation or productivity. "You are inherently valuable, Natalie," Dr. Winters would remind me, her words a gentle balm. "Not because of what you provide to others, but simply because you exist." This concept was revolutionary to someone who had been raised to believe my worth was measured solely by my usefulness to others. Gradually, I began to internalize this new perspective, making decisions based on my own needs and desires, rather than anticipating what others expected of me. One of the most significant changes was the development of a genuine support system entirely outside my family. Julia, my colleague, who had supported me so fiercely during the initial crisis, became a close friend. We began meeting weekly for coffee, sharing our experiences with difficult family dynamics and celebrating our small victories in establishing healthier patterns. I also joined a support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents, where I found an incredible community with others who truly understood my experiences. The validation and shared wisdom of this group accelerated my healing in ways individual therapy alone could not have accomplished. "The hardest part for me was accepting that I couldn't change them," shared one group member whose story resonated deeply with mine. "Once I stopped trying to earn their love and focused on loving myself, everything shifted. As my inner circle transformed, so did my living situation. With my newfound financial freedom, I decided to sell my condominium and purchase a small house in a neighborhood I absolutely loved. The process of creating a home that truly reflected my taste and priorities became a physical manifestation of my emotional journey. I painted the walls colors I had always admired, but my mother would have criticized as too bold. I arranged furniture for comfort and function rather than outward appearance. I even planted a small garden in the backyard, finding unexpected peace and joy in nurturing growing things. My parents, meanwhile, were forced to downsize significantly after selling their house to comply with our legal agreement. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, and for the first time in decades, my father began actively looking for employment. According to Michael, who maintained limited contact with them, the transition was incredibly difficult, and they frequently blamed me. "Dad complains constantly about having to work at his age," Michael reported after a brief, tense visit to their new apartment. "Mom keeps saying they wouldn't be in this situation if their daughter hadn't abandoned them." Though these reports still stung, the pain was duller now, more a sad acknowledgement of what could never be than an acute, fresh wound. I maintained my boundaries, firmly redirecting any direct contact about financial matters to my lawyer and limiting other communication to brief, factual exchanges when absolutely necessary. As the months passed, my parents made several attempts at reconciliation, though their definition of making amends never included genuine accountability for their actions or behaviors. Each attempt followed a predictable pattern: initial warmth and vague apologies, followed by subtle hints about their financial difficulties, culminating in direct requests for assistance when the earlier, softer approaches failed. Dr. Winters helped me recognize these patterns and respond appropriately, acknowledging any genuine effort at connection while firmly maintaining my boundaries around financial support. "They need to experience the natural consequences of their actions," she reminded me. "That is how real change happens, if it is going to happen at all." The approaching holiday season presented a new, unexpected challenge. Thanksgiving had always been spent at my parents' house, with me providing all the food and often doing all the cooking, while enduring their relentless criticism about everything from the moistness of the turkey to my personal life choices. This year I knew it would be different. After careful consideration, I declined my parents' invitation, which had, predictably, come with guilt-inducing references to possibly our last Thanksgiving in this apartment if things don't improve. Instead, I accepted Julia's warm invitation to join her family celebration. The contrast was illuminating, almost blinding. Julia's family welcomed me warmly, engaged me in genuine conversation, expressed interest in my life without judgment, and thanked me sincerely for the pie I had contributed. There were no backhanded compliments, no thinly veiled criticisms, no tensions simmering beneath forced politeness. "Is it always like this?" I asked Julia quietly as we helped clean up after dinner, genuinely bewildered. "Like what?" she asked, genuinely confused by my question. "So pleasant," I clarified, so free of drama and guilt. Julia laughed, then grew serious when she realized I wasn't joking. "Not every family gathering is perfect, of course," she admitted. "But yes, generally it is like this. This is what family is supposed to feel like, Natalie." Her words stayed with me long after the holiday. This is what family is supposed to feel like. Not an obligation, not a source of stress, but a genuine source of support and belonging. As Christmas approached, I made another significant decision. Rather than participating in the usual family gift exchange, which had always involved me giving expensive presents and receiving token items in return, I decided to redirect my holiday budget. I made donations to organizations supporting victims of financial abuse and children from disadvantaged backgrounds, causes that had become deeply, personally meaningful to me. I also created new traditions for myself, attending a holiday concert with Julia and her husband, volunteering at a community dinner, and hosting a small, intimate gathering for friends on Christmas Eve. My brother Michael and his wife Sarah joined us, bringing a delicious homemade dish and simple, thoughtful gifts. Amanda and Jackson stopped by briefly, still navigating their own complicated feelings about our family dynamics. They had postponed their wedding indefinitely, choosing instead to save for a house and build their relationship on a more solid foundation before making that commitment. Your standing up to Mom and Dad made me realize I was rushing into marriage partly because it was what they expected, Amanda confided as we shared a quiet moment in the kitchen. "I'm trying to figure out what I actually want, not what will please them or solve their problems." It was the most honest conversation we had ever had, an unexpected gift, more valuable than any wrapped present. The new year brought another surprising development. I received a job offer from a competing tech company with a significant salary increase and more leadership responsibility. In the past, I would have declined immediately, crippled by worry about how a job change would affect my ability to support my family. Now I was free to consider the opportunity based solely on my own career goals and interests. After careful consideration and consultation with mentors I trusted, I accepted the position. The transition reinvigorated my professional life, challenging me in exciting new ways and connecting me with colleagues who genuinely valued my contributions. Within months, I was leading a major project that showcased my technical and leadership skills, earning recognition I would once have dismissed as undeserved. My financial situation improved rapidly as well. Without the constant drain of supporting multiple households, my savings grew quickly. Blake, my financial advisor, helped me develop a comprehensive plan that included retirement, savings, investments, and funds for personal goals like travel and continued education. "You are on track to achieve financial independence well ahead of schedule," he noted at our 6-month review meeting. "The difference in your trajectory is remarkable." The most profound changes, however, were internal. I began to recognize and challenge the critical inner voice that had always echoed my parents' judgments. I practiced self-compassion when I made mistakes, instead of berating myself. I learned to identify my own preferences and desires, rather than automatically deferring to others. These shifts manifested in surprising, delightful ways. I discovered I actually enjoyed public speaking, something I had avoided my entire life because my father had once mocked a presentation I gave in high school. I found I preferred bold colors and patterns in my clothing, despite my mother's lifelong insistence that I should wear slimming neutrals. I realized I loved cooking elaborate meals when it was by choice rather than obligation. Small discoveries, perhaps, but they represented a fundamental reclamation of self that had been suppressed for decades under the crushing weight of others' expectations and judgments. 1 year after that explosive confrontation at the restaurant, I could look back and see not just what I had lost, but what I had gained. The journey had been painful, the costs real. Family relationships had been irreparably altered. Illusions of parental love shattered. Financial resources lost. Yet from those profound losses had emerged a stronger, more authentic self, capable of creating boundaries, recognizing genuine connection, and building a life aligned with my own values rather than others' demands. Exactly 1 year after the dinner that changed everything, I sat in my garden, reflecting on the journey. The spring flowers were blooming, a beautiful, vibrant visual reminder of growth and renewal after a difficult winter. My new home, a modest but charming 2-bedroom house with a yard, represented more than just a physical space. It was a sanctuary I had created for myself, free from the pervasive influence and expectations of others. My relationship with my parents had settled into a carefully structured pattern. After months of attempted manipulation and several predictable cycles of arguments and superficial reconciliation attempts, we had established what my therapist called structured contact. We communicated primarily through email with occasional brief phone calls for specific, practical purposes. Our interactions were civil but distant, focused on logistical matters rather than any emotional connection. My father had found part-time work as a consultant, though he frequently complained about the indignity of having to work at his age. My mother had taken a position at a local boutique, her first job in decades. They continued to live in their apartment, having finally accepted that their previous lifestyle, funded by my income, was no longer available to them. The legal agreement regarding the fraudulent accounts had been fulfilled, with the sale of their house covering most of the debts. I had absorbed some losses, but Blake assured me that my financial recovery was well ahead of schedule. My new job had come with equity options that were already showing promising returns, and my savings had grown substantially without the drain of supporting multiple households. More important than the financial resolution, though, was the emotional freedom I had gained. Dr. Winters and I had worked through layers of conditioned guilt and obligation, developing new patterns of thought that allowed me to prioritize my own well-being without the crushing weight of shame that had once accompanied any act of self-care. "The most significant change I see in you, Natalie," Dr. Winters observed during a recent session, "is your ability to distinguish between genuine responsibility and imposed obligation. You can now recognize when someone is attempting to manipulate you through guilt or a twisted sense of family loyalty. This new discernment had allowed me to maintain healthier relationships with my siblings, who had undergone their own reckonings with our toxic family dynamics. Michael and Sarah had become regular parts of my life, joining me for dinner every few weeks and sharing honest conversations about our upbringing and its lasting effects. Amanda and I had developed a more tentative but increasingly authentic connection. After postponing her wedding, she had entered therapy herself, beginning to recognize how our parents' favoritism had shaped her own sense of entitlement and dependency. Our conversations were sometimes uncomfortable, but always real, a stark contrast to the superficial interactions of the past. "I never realized how much they pitted us against each other," she told me during a recent lunch. "They made me believe you had it easy because you were smart and successful, while I needed their help and protection. Looking back, I can see they were using both of us in different ways." This insight from my sister, who had once been my parents' most effective tool for manipulation, represented a profound shift in our family system. The old dynamics were being questioned, the unspoken rules challenged, the established roles rejected. My social circle had expanded and deepened in ways I never could have anticipated. Julia and her husband had become close friends, including me in family gatherings and weekend activities. My support group for adult children of emotionally abusive parents had provided both healing and lasting friendships with people who truly understood my experiences. I had even begun dating again, cautiously at first, fearful of repeating patterns of giving too much and expecting too little. Thomas, a software architect I met through a professional conference, was patient with my careful boundaries and incredibly respectful of my journey. Our relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect and genuine interest, rather than need or obligation. Perhaps the most significant change of all was my relationship with myself. The critical inner voice that had echoed my parents' judgments for decades had gradually quieted, replaced by a more compassionate and realistic assessment of my strengths and weaknesses. I had learned to celebrate my accomplishments without dismissing them and to acknowledge my mistakes without defining myself by them. This self-acceptance extended to my appearance, my preferences, my choices, and my needs. I no longer felt compelled to justify my existence through constant productivity or service to others. I could rest without guilt, pursue pleasure without shame, and express anger without fear. The healing was not complete, and perhaps it never would be. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of the old patterns, occasional dreams in which I was once again the desperate child seeking approval that never came. But these moments no longer defined me or determined my choices. They were echoes of the past, not dictates for the present or future. As I sat in my garden on that anniversary, the sun beginning to set, casting long, peaceful shadows, I reflected on the hard-won lessons of this difficult journey. True family, I realized, is defined by mutual respect and support, not by blood or obligation. The people who had stood by me, validated my experiences, and respected my boundaries had proven to be more family to me than those who shared my DNA but exploited my loyalty. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It is essential for healthy relationships. By establishing and maintaining clear limits on what I would accept and provide, I had created space for more authentic connections, based on mutual care rather than exploitation. Financial independence, I learned, is a profound form of self-protection. By securing my own resources and ensuring they were used according to my values and priorities, I had gained freedom from manipulation and control. Healing requires both separation and connection. Distancing myself from toxic relationships had been necessary, but equally important was building new, healthier relationships that demonstrated what genuine care and respect looked like. And finally, self-worth is inherent, not earned through service or sacrifice. This was perhaps the most difficult lesson, requiring daily practice and reinforcement to counter decades of contrary messaging. Yet, it was also the most transformative, reshaping how I moved through the world and related to others. These lessons had come at a high cost. The illusion of unconditional parental love had been shattered. Family relationships were permanently altered. Years of financial resources were lost. Yet, what I had gained was far more valuable. Authentic self-knowledge, genuine connections, and the freedom to create a life aligned with my own values, rather than others' expectations. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journey was not over, but the hardest part was behind me. The path forward, while not always clear or easy, was finally mine to choose, guided by my own wisdom and surrounded by people who truly wished me well. So, I'm curious, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a line with family to protect yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd really love to hear from you.